So we see leaders all the time are that a little frozen. People can either get frozen or they can get overactive.
Mm.
I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do it all. That's not a recipe for success. Or I don't know what to do and I'm going to freeze.
Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. Thank you so much for tuning in again. I am here with my friend, my colleague, Patsy. How are you today?
Quite well, thank you.
Awesome. We are picking up where we left off in after part 3 of our 5-part series on growing up your business, having made the distinction between growing your business, which every business owner wants, and growing up your business, which really every business owner needs to do at some point before she or he can scale and grow that business. And so today we're focusing on actually what we often call our second pillar, and that's leader readiness. So that really we're going to talk about that exactly, the critical role that leaders play in your ability to scale and grow. We're going to talk about how do you know if they're ready, and like in previous episodes, stay tuned, because at the end we'll tell you about a free resource that you can have that kind of accompanies this episode, so that you can get a sense of how are we doing, and how might we help our leaders mature. So Patsy, I'm going to just kick it right to you. Actually, before we do that, I have said this before in other episodes, but I'm going to, I feel like it always bears repeating. Like, I couldn't think of a better person, a better guest to help us cover this topic than Patsy, because this is, for you, this is like a lifelong passion. And because it's a passion, developing leaders in an organization, you've kind of made it like, I mean, it continues to be a life's work, I think. So I feel like you're perfect for helping us peel back the onion of organization, leadership. What is it? Why is it important? How do I know? Thank you. Thanks for bringing that expertise today.
For the acknowledgement, Patrick. I was thinking about, so often thinking about what organizations can do to develop their people. But what you're helping me see now is, why is it so important? Because over the years, myself included, as a worker in an organization, when people aren't given the right tools or the right support to succeed, then we're not operating at our optimum. We're not contributing everything we could. Then we take a disgruntled person home to us, home with us, and then it just perpetuates itself. So I'm passionate about this, because when people bring our best selves to the work we do, everybody thrives.
And the beauty of this, this falls squarely into some of the work that we do. And obviously, this is not going to be an infomercial, I promise, about us and the work that we do, but we certainly can speak from experience about some of the leadership development work we've done with organizations, with clients. We talk about what we've seen, and how you as a listener can take some of our experience and just apply it on your own, right? I mean, here's to look for in your organization. Some signs that maybe you're struggling, that the leadership in the organization is a potential, let's call it, opportunity for growth, as opposed to calling it a weakness. So actually, Patsy, let's start there, because it's one of the things that we hear from leaders, and I guarantee I guarantee every listener can think of at least one, if not multiple leaders in the organization that they just wish they could get more out of them. They just wish that said leader would step up. So let me ask you, why don't leaders step up when we promote them into a leadership role? Why do they struggle, or whether it's a struggle or just resist stepping up into the leadership role?
Well, I much of the time we see that people get promoted because they're an expert or they do something really well. They're a good project manager, or they're a good strategist, or a brand ambassador, whatever it is. So they're good at doing something. So they get promoted into a position that isn't clearly identified. They're not given the new skills and behaviors they need to be successful in that position. And it does require new skills and behaviors. And they are afraid to let go of their own identity that allowed them the promotion. So you add all those together, and it's kind of a perfect storm for, I'm not going to step up. I don't know how to step up. So, and you and I, Patrick, so we see leaders all the time are that a little frozen. People can either get frozen or they can get overactive. I don't know what to do, so I'm going to do it all. That's not a recipe for success. Or I don't know what to do, and I'm going to freeze. And, everywhere in between. But
that is such a great point. Let me rephrase that. There were several great points in there, not the least of which is it's a different set of skills when you move from a doer into a leader, even from a doer to a manager to a leader. Those are different sets of skills. And simply moving me from an individual contributor position where I was highly successful, if I wasn't, you wouldn't be considering me for leadership. Simply moving me into leadership and thinking I'm going to transition easily is short-sighted, right? It sets me up and the organization for whether it's set me up for failure or certainly not the success that you might be looking for. And that's a first point. Go ahead.
Absolutely. And I think it is a predominant way of promoting people in our business cultures. Somebody's good at X, and so we're going to promote them to Y.
Mm-hmm.
It happened, and we see that in businesses of 10 people, and we see that businesses of 500 people. It's indicative in the way we promote people.
Yes, another point that you made is my identity up to that point has been as a doer.
Yes.
And that's a challenge for a challenge for people to let go of how they've been recognized, how they've, in their mind, how they have felt like they are contributing value to the organization. It's now no longer about what I can do. In fact, it's almost an understanding about leadership that if I'm in a leadership role and it's only about what I do, I'm not doing it right. So, how do you, you coach a lot of executives. You coach a lot. You are fantastic. You have a lot of experience developing new leaders who are moving from that. You've got programs that you are implementing, like year-long programs to develop new leaders. How do you help someone? Is it a mindset shift? Is it a tactical shift? Is it something else entirely, or is it none of those and something else?
Be pieces of any of those. I think the really critical piece is for people to see that they've been promoted to a new position, and for the organization to give them some clarity about what that roles and responsibilities are. So it's not just the role, it's what do I need to do and how do I need to behave in order to be successful in that role. So here's where I've been promoted to, and here's where I've been. And those two are not in the same place. There's a gap between those two places. What I've been promoted to is not clear, then that's the first place where you're going to get wobbly. And if I don't have the support from the organization or from the person that manages me, i.e., here's where you are now, here's where you're going to go. It's a journey to get from A to B. Here's how I'm going to help you. Some people come in with great people skills, but don't know how to run an effective meeting, for example. Something as simple as that. So you have to show people that it's a journey or that it's a process to get from where they've been to where you want them to go, and to give them the support. And to, this is where I get really passionate, and to realize that every single person goes through that journey differently. The skills you, Patrick, bring to that job are different than the skills I bring. So we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. We want people to hold on to what they are good at.
So what I'm hearing is there's a leadership a leadership responsibility. I want to make the distinction. Not there's an added responsibility, not of the person who's being promoted into that leadership role or the person who's in that leadership role, but of the person who leads that person or who's putting that person into the leadership role, to help them understand the gap that exists from what you used to do to what I'm now needing you to do in this new role. Since our listener is the frustrated CEO or the frustrated senior leader and is more likely to be the latter, not the former, not the person being put into that role. Although, let's not assume
Exactly.
that every one of our listeners has mastered the art of leadership and letting go of the doing. In fact, I just today worked with an executive who is actually like a successor. He's an identified successor for a senior leadership role. Here's somebody who's been in leadership for a long time, who openly shared, I struggle with delegation. I struggle with, right, which in essence is exactly what you're saying. We're saying, I still default to doing. So let's not assume that all of our listeners have figured that out. But for the listener who's thinking more about somebody that they have placed into a leadership role or want to place into a leadership role, what is their responsibility in setting that person up for success?
Well, starting to put the processes and systems in place for that success, which means what I was just talking about. We have roles and responsibilities clearly defined.
Mm-hmm.
We understand, we have coaching present so people know it's a process to get from here to there. We have it, we'll talk about that in a minute, but we have it as part of our culture. Leadership development, promoting people is part of the way we do things around here because we care about our people and we want them to bring their best selves to the work they do. And then it gets into some of the things you're talking about. There are 2 or 3 topics that come up over and over and over again. Delegation is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
How do I delegate? In order to delegate, you have to let go. Again, you have to let go of who you've known yourself to be in order to delegate. And working and changing, you mentioned this earlier, changing your mindset. Sometimes we call that a growth mindset, or we also refer to working on the business, not in the business, is a process of letting go. And recognizing that as you move, and getting a clearer picture of what, certainly if you're in the mid-manager or executive level of an organization, starting to not do the work, but see how the work gets done. So that there's some components in that as well. How do you start to be more strategic? How do you, delegate's another good one there. How do you let your senior team people do all the work and you focus more on strategy? So it's a progression as you move up through the business.
So as you were talking, I was also thinking about a leadership program that I know you're in the middle of delivering right now. Again, it's one of those year-long leadership development programs to develop an entire team. And just thinking about some of the challenges, some of the issues. Let's go back to the original question that we led with. Why don't people step up? And I don't think it's always because they don't want to. It's because I think most people would say, I'm doing what I think I'm supposed to do. Right? I think I'm doing, I haven't heard otherwise. I'm just doing what I can. There are, as a listener, as you're thinking about the leaders in your organization who haven't stepped up, whatever that means to you, right? Where there's a gap, maybe to me I always explain that as there's a gap between your expectations and their performance, right? And you need to close that gap. I can think about programs that you've delivered, some of the challenges that we've heard from when we've asked the question, when we're trying to figure out why are leaders struggling to step up. There are sometimes, and this may be the case for our listeners, sometimes there are leaders who are in leadership roles only because we haven't given them other ways to grow and progress in their career other than this leadership track. So in other words, people take leadership roles because they don't want to top out at 35 or 40 or 20 or 20. They want to grow and develop. And in the organization, the only ways we've created opportunity for growth is in this leadership track. And so you have people who really don't want to be leaders, but want to grow. They jump into the leadership track and then they don't step up because it's really not what they want to do. You've seen that, yes? Well, okay, how do you help that person step up? Or how do you disentangle from that?
Well, first of all, I think what you're highlighting here is a myth about how we get promoted in our business world. And that is the only way to do that is to step the next rung of the ladder. I actually have a client who, she said, I really love what I do. I just learned to do it better. Can I just learn to do better? Can I do that? It's So I said, let's find out. Let's talk to leadership. And they said, great, just learn to do it. So for the past couple of years, that's what she's been doing. She's honed her craft. It has allowed her to step up. It's just not stepping up in the usual way. And now, because of that, she's now ready to step up into more of a strategic role where she wasn't before. So you have to have somebody in the organization that's kind of looking at your key people and who are they at this point in their career and what are their career aspirations. So that's kind of a component of coaching. We didn't really mention it a few minutes ago, but helping people design their own career path so they can be successful, but they can also be successful in your organization is really important. And I think there's some questions, you're just talking to the senior leaders and the CEOs. There's some questions that you can start asking yourself as you look out over your organization. It's like, where are we over functioning for other people? Sometimes, you or your senior staff are over functioning or taking on responsibilities because maybe you haven't known how to delegate, or maybe you don't have confidence or trust in the people you've promoted because they don't have those skills. I also think, which is part of what you're talking to right there, is it's easy to confuse, which goes back to our opening statement about stepping up. It's easy to confuse technical excellence with leadership readiness.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
We have, recently one person said, well, I was about the last person standing, so I got promoted. It's like, come on, CEOs and senior leaders, let's start thinking about getting the right people in the right seats.
Yeah, and the danger there is we've all seen this, and listeners, if you've been in leadership for any length of time, you've experienced this. We end up promoting people right out of the organization. We have someone who is really good in the role that they're in, and then we put them into a leadership role, and suddenly there's that gap that you've talked about between what they're doing and what we need them to do. And because we can't close that gap, either they're failing, their teams are failing because they don't have a leader, right? They're leaderless. And either the person leaves on their own because they're not happy and they know they're not being successful, or we then let them go. We've seen it happen where people get promoted into roles over their head or out of their comfort zone or that they don't want to do, and we end up losing them, and then we've lost really strong technical people.
Couldn't agree with you more.
You can if you want to. It's okay.
I know I do at times, but in this moment I'm not going to. And if we talk about leadership readiness, if we're not, again, CEOs, senior people out there, if you're not modeling what being an effective leader in your role means, then it's going to be very difficult for anybody else in your organization to be able to model that for themselves at their level.
Okay, what does that look like? What does it mean to model effective leadership?
That's a whole episode in itself, Patrick. And in a nutshell, it's working. It's like knowing what your lanes are. What are you responsible for? So, another one of our pillars is strategic alignment. So, knowing that if you're the CEO, you're responsible for the direction of the organization. If you're the CFO, you want to make sure that the financial aspects of the organization are running smoothly and give you the information you need to know how to course correct. So it's knowing your role and responsibilities. It's also being a strategic thinker. It's also realizing that even at this level of the organization, you're about building relationships. It's about, being a leadership team that your people can trust, that they want to follow. And it's working, and people see you working on the business, not in the business. So,
Those are great examples. Yep.
so when something's not working or something didn't happen like it was supposed to, instead of jumping in to fix it, they see you going to your senior team or your team leaders and giving them the tools or the responsibility they need to fix it.
You're right. I'm going to affirm what you said a minute ago, which is like that could be a whole episode in and of itself. And frankly, I think if you've listened to every other or a handful of other episodes that we've done prior to this one, we've covered these topics before. Leading yourself first, what it means to be strategic. I mean, I'll even you said use the word influence. Leadership is not about authority. I often coach leaders. If you're wielding authority, there is a cost to the relationship. It's so you can play the authority card at any time as a leader, but I always coach leaders like put that authority card in your back pocket and walk around with it knowing, okay, I'm the boss, I'm the leader. I need to break ties. I need to make the one, I need to ultimately set the strategy, set the course. I need to remember in the room that I'm the leader, but you don't play that card. It's not about authority, it's about influence. It's what you said. And which then brings us back to why leaders may be struggling in my organization. It's because there is a part of leadership that requires the ability to inspire and influence others. And it's not to say that when I get promoted into a role that I have to have that, but if I don't have that, then as the senior leader, you need to help me develop that. And maybe it's as simple as helping me see that that's part of that gap between where I am and where I need to be. Right now, I haven't built the relationships that will allow me to influence, or I don't have credibility, or I don't have trust. I need to go work on these things so that I can, or I am overplaying the authority card. I need to, whatever it might be, I'm going to have to grow my ability to influence others, because this ties back to all of this is a system. You said earlier, if I haven't let go of my doer mentality and I'm still measuring my success on how much I can do, then I'm not recognizing or owning the fact that leadership is not about what I can do. It's about what we can accomplish through others, what I can get done through the efforts of others. That requires influence.
And so that ups the ante, so to speak, going from how do I model at the top leadership behaviors to how do we create an organization, i.e. a culture, that is reflective of promoting people not just for performance, but for thinking or for relationship buildings or whatever is important to your organization.
Right.
And setting up expectations for how do we behave as leaders. Because I know we go on the premise, Patrick, that leadership can happen at any level of the organization.
Yes.
If you've listened to these podcasts before, I've had a manufacturing company. I taught leadership development for many years, and a manufacturing company, it was the frontline workers that were actually the most innovative in the organization, because they had a culture that leadership could happen at any level of the organization. And it used to bring tears to my eyes to see these frontline workers so innovative and making such an impact. So those are a couple of things about culture. I'll circle back. You also need to equip your managers with the coaching skills and the time for development.
Let's talk
It's
about that.
not usually built into the way we do business.
Let's talk about that, because there is a cost to leadership, right? Again, in fact, I just had this conversation with a leader talking about even at the highest levels, there's still an expectation of billable hours. And I'm not saying that in leadership you can't have any of that, but if people will place emphasis on what their leadership is telling them is most important. So if they're, I know that seems kind of obvious, but if you put me in a leadership role and I still, if you put me in a leadership role and the expectation is I'm now going to do that at the same time that I'm doing everything I used to do as an individual contributor, as a doer, either my job now just became, a job and a half, or more likely, I'm going to focus more on what I'm responsible for, what I'm accountable for, what you're going to come ask me, did you do that? And the leadership piece of it is going to suffer. So what is the right balance? Do you advocate, Patsy, for 100% working leaders, for 0% working leaders where they're all leadership and no billable hours? What's the right mix?
I think that's a decision that each CEO or senior team needs to make. That then gets folded into the culture. I think it's easy to get disconnected from the work if you're not doing some of the work. And as you move up in the organization, it's relationship building, developing others, working cross-functionally, working more on strategy, or at least seeing strategy and being able to implement strategic initiatives becomes more important. So it's almost like the more responsibility you have in the organization, which is what we've been talking about, the less you should be working in the business and the more you should be working on the business.
Yeah, it's funny. All the I love the sports analogies. I'm thinking about you'd have to go back several decades to find the last player coach. Right, you have to go back. There actually were at times there were player coaches. There was the coach also happened to be a player on the team. You don't see that anymore, right?
It's like a nightmare to me, and I'm not a sports person.
But no, literally, like the coach was also a player on the team. You don't see that anymore. You now see the football team. You don't see Bill Belichick on the field, right? Now that may be because he's 150 years old, but that was mean. I'm not a Bill Belichick fan, but so you don't see the head coach on the field, and again, maybe it's you could argue it's because the game, it's sports requires being in tip-top shape physically, but I think you lose a perspective when you're running the play that that you might gain by being able to observe the whole thing. I don't know. I don't know where I was going with that. It's just if your organization has all player coaches, then are you missing something? Are they too far down in the weeds? To your point, I do think there's value in being close to the work, but I feel like most of the organizations we talk to, most of the frustrated leaders we talk to, when you really peel it back, their leaders are more working almost 100% working managers, and you just have to expect that there's a capacity issue. People will have a hard time stepping up if they also have a full caseload of work that they have to accomplish. It just means they're not getting to the coaching that you said needs to be done earlier. They don't have time for the strategic thinking. They don't have time to deal with the chronic performance and behavior issues because they're constantly trying to crank out the work.
And when you reflect on an organization in that mode, which there are a lot out there, and yet we want to scale and grow, you can see why there's a gap between where we are now and where we want to go, and the importance of investing and building the leadership muscle to support the growth, because it's easy to hire or promote for performance, but that's going to be status quo. It really won't multiply your capacity for
Right.
growth
That's
until you mature the organization.
that's it. To me, that is like a key point of this episode. It's why there's an entire episode dedicated to this topic in a series called Growing Up Your Business, right? Or Growing versus Growing Up Your Business. Here's the key point. You cannot grow your business if you don't grow your leaders. You will hit a ceiling that is set by the capacity of your leadership, by the skill, the effectiveness of your leadership. That's the ceiling in your organization, is the effectiveness of your leaders. And it's not just your senior leaders. It's leadership maturity at every level of the organization. That is essentially the bridge between vision and execution. So in a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about like what does leadership maturity look like, Patsy. I want to ask you, like, what is the framework of leadership maturity? But what are some signs before we get there? What are some signs that the leaders in my organization are, I hate to say like not fit to lead, but maybe that's where we as an organization need to mature. And I would say this, here's the challenge to the leader. Before you point fingers at the leaders, look in the mirror and ask, am I doing what I need to do to equip these leaders before I decide that they can't lead, right? Have I done my job? We've talked about a couple of things, right? Leaders who are still doers, leaders who maybe struggle with strategic thinking or struggle to with the coaching aspect. Is there anything we missed, Patsy? Signs that we might have a leadership maturity issue in our organization that's keeping us from growing?
I think a couple more that I would mention, or certainly one more that I would mention, is that there's a bottleneck in your organization. People don't know, can I make that decision, or who can make that decision?
Yep. So lack of decision clarity.
Right. And there are probably bottlenecks that show up in other ways, but that's the one that comes immediately to mind. The other goes back to, I was talking about those frontline workers. If we don't have any creativity or innovation,
Yeah.
creativity outside of my job responsibility, because some people have that as part of their job responsibility. But if innovation's lacking and there's no creativity, that's another. There's just also, how do you take the pulse of the culture? Is there a levity or an energy here that's palpable that you want more of, or is it just kind of dull and flat? That's not as tangible, but certainly it can be tangible. So those are some. I would revisit again the fact that delegation is really important.
Yeah.
And I think that another is, which is we've touched around, but we haven't really hit straight on. And that if you're a senior leader, if you're the CEO, you should be in your senior meetings, you should be asking yourself, or you should be asking your senior team, where are we, or where are our key people over functioning for others?
Tell me what you mean by over functioning.
So if you're the CFO and you have a controller, but you're in the weeds doing the numbers, then you're over functioning.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Great
one
example.
example.
Great example. And
And
yeah,
then you
we
should be
go
asking
ahead.
yourself, who are we developing to think beyond their roles, which is another form of innovation.
Yes. Yeah. That is a frustration that we hear so often, and I can't imagine that we don't have people listening right now who are like, "Oh gosh, I constantly get pulled down into the weeds." We often say, "Pay attention to where you're spending your time. Pay attention. If you're constantly getting pulled into, firefighting, it's likely a sign that there's a leadership gap in the organization because things aren't being managed, or fires aren't being prevented. Maybe is a better way of saying it. And then to your point, I think an important, it's not just about leading others. That is an important aspect of leadership, but also developing others is an important aspect of leadership. It's funny, I coach an executive who is very interested in moving up and growing, and he's very interested in his own career path and his own career progression. And recently we've started talking about, great, who's going to take your place? Because why is he being looked at for bigger and better roles? Because he's fantastic. He's literally exceptional in the role he's in. How often have you heard this, Patsy, where it's, man, I'd love to promote you, but we can't because you're so great. You're like, no one can replace you. So you're kind of like, you can be so effective that you're stuck in the role you're in. Well, that's role of leadership is, how do you develop others to succeed you so that you can free yourself up to go to the next level? So that developing others is an important part of leadership as well. All right. So let me ask you this. What does leadership maturity look like? We'll just ask it succinctly.
Well, it has many of the things we're talking about. You have a clear idea in your organization. So what are your goals for what's your culture? What kind of culture are you creating around leadership? And then you have a clear path for developing your leaders.
Okay.
And the tools and resources needed, many of what we've talked about. And I think before you could even answer that question, it would be important to ask yourself, where are you now? What is your current reality with leadership? Are all your people in the right seats? Do they have a clear idea of their role? Do they have the skills and behaviors they need? If you're on a road trip and you want to get to New York, but you think you're starting in San Francisco as opposed to Dallas, Texas, it's a very different trip.
That's right. Yep. How do you begin? How do you begin to shift the culture? You've talked about culture a couple of different times: culture of innovation, culture of leadership development. How do you begin to shift? Okay, once I've assessed where we are, how do I get to this place that we're talking about, of really strong leadership that helps us scale and grow, that removes the ceiling?
I see that as a declaration by the senior team, by the CEO and the senior team. Because if it goes back to how are we modeling leadership in our organization, it's declaring this is where we're headed and here's how we're going to get there. So if we're creating a new reality or a shift in our reality for our organization, we need new skills and behaviors. We need some shifts in our skills and behaviors. So getting clarity at the top, and then determining what's the gap. We were talking about the gap earlier. So it's a transition, and consistently stating this is where we're going and this is how we're going to get there. And this is the hardest part for any of the CEOs or senior leaders, is again that modeling. Because I can guarantee everybody listening to this, including Patrick and I, when you want to go someplace new, it requires new behaviors. It
Mhm.
creates a shift in your identity. And I think we'd both say, Patrick, it goes back to standing on your purpose, your values, your why. Why do we exist?
I remember, to me, when I think about making the shift, I think it's about recognizing, instead of looking at leadership readiness or leadership development as an expense, it's seeing it as an investment. I realize it's the same, in essence, it's that we're still putting money towards this, but I've seen this. It has stuck with me. If you just Google what is the ROI on leadership development, what is the ROI of investments in leader readiness, I have seen anywhere from 900% return up. I mean, like that it's that every dollar invested returns returns $9. So when you the saying, all boats rise with the tide. In this case, the tide is the leadership capability in the organization. And as your leader, you invest in the leaders. Again, it's very specific, pointed, intentional, directive dollars invested in just a few, a person or a few people in the organization who are leaders. The ROI you realize that not just in how they show up, but in how their teams begin to show up, how their people begin to show up. And that's where it becomes exponential. Right now you said it as much. Like, I promise you, you've mentioned that story before, the frontline innovation that happens. That's coming from leadership. It's coming from leadership. So they're not doing that on their own. Somebody invested in the leadership, and the leadership then set the expectation for, and not just the expectation, but the environment for innovation. And it probably changed how they hire, right? They hire innovative people. And so, like, the investment in that expectation, that skill and ability for those leaders, then creates a whole organization that is capable of being innovative. And what does that do for that's how you scale and grow the organization. That's again, otherwise, as I like to say, good luck executing without confident and competent leaders in your organization. It's not going to happen.
So I'll put a plug in, and then let's get practical up. If you're listening to this and you haven't listened to episode 2 in this series, which is called The Counterintuitive Pause, Why Slowing Down Accelerates Growth, I suggest you do that. It's the same concept of why it's not just about hiring more, it's about multiplying capacity. But if we don't slow down to make sure we're on the right path, or if we need to course correct, then we're going to end up somewhere we don't really want to end up.
I agree. All right. So let's get practical. It's part of every episode where we like to give you very practical things that you can do today, tomorrow, or mindset shifts that you can make, hopefully rather easily, to, in this case, begin impacting, raising the leadership capability in your organization so that you can blow the lid off of the ceiling that exists. So, Patsy, what are some key pieces of advice you would give to our listener today?
Well, if you're in an executive role or in the senior role of leading the organization, notice if you're working in the organization versus on the organization. And that starts with pausing long enough to become aware. I'd also say that look at the 3 or 4 key drivers of what you want from your leaders. Is it delegation? Is it decision making? But get a really good idea of what are the key components of leadership for your organization. We've mentioned many today, which we would recommend. And then do an assessment. How are we doing in those areas? And also recognize it's not just that in addition to developing the individual, you're talking about developing a culture that supports that individual and individual growth so that everybody at no matter what level of the organization has the opportunity to be a leader. What would you add to that?
Oh, I have a whole, like, 2 pages of notes. Um, I'll add, I love what you said earlier. I think in order for this to really work, in order for an organization to really grow and develop strong leaders, right? And align with the vision and the mission and like the purpose of the organization. The senior team, you have to get clear, aligned, and then the word you used was declarative. You have to get clear, aligned, and declarative about the leadership that the kind of leadership that you want in your organization, right? If you're not clear and aligned on that, then you're not sure what you're working toward. So get clear and aligned on that, and then go make that happen. Let's see. If you're Oh, I love this. If you're not modeling effective leadership yourself, then the leaders in your organization will struggle to be effective leaders. So I think that's you said that. I'm gonna add one that we didn't talk about today that I had on my list of things to get to, and I kind of forgot. But new research came out from, I believe it was Gartner or one of the the companies that surveys employees, and the latest research says that 40% of employees currently are looking for a new job. 40% of employees are looking for a new job, and how that's relevant, how that's a let's get practical, is the top 2 reasons. So think about that: 40% of your organization, on average, looking for a new job. On average, there are 2 reasons. The top 2 reasons why was a lack of professional growth opportunity, and the second is leadership apathy. And right, like, my leader doesn't care. I just don't feel like my leader cares. And you can address both of those with strong leadership in your organization. You check the top 2 reasons why 40% of the workforce is currently looking for a new job by investing in the leadership development, the leadership readiness, the leadership capacity of your organization, because you will address leadership apathy, right? You're conveying to people, no, you have to be invested in your people. And as we were talking about, like, if you're developing your people, that's it. It's the top 2 reasons why people leave. My boss doesn't care about me, and there's nowhere for me to, like, I can't grow and develop in this organization. So that should bring home the importance of leader readiness. If the other point we made earlier, that the ceiling on your growth is the leadership ability, the leadership capacity in your organization. So hopefully that people understand the why behind the importance of this. They understand why this is something you really need to address. Anything you would circle back and add?
I would circle and add, which is going to be one that lights your heart up, is set expectations for leadership behaviors, not just outputs.
You know me well.
So leaders need to know what's expected of them, which is the outputs, and then how to do that, which is the behaviors. Having the what without the how is insufficient. And I would also add, recognize and acknowledge that at each level of performance in your organization, it requires different skills and different behaviors. I can't tell you, I introduce that a lot to people, and they're like, it's like a light bulb going off, and yet it's an integral part of our business life.
Agreed. Yep. I have nothing to add that wasn't already said.
A done deal, then.
I think you nailed it. Now, just like the other episodes in this series, we have a takeaway, right? We have a resource. We have a resource. Do you want to talk about that?
Yes, it's called the Leadership Readiness Framework. We talked about some of these people. We didn't exactly talk about this as a framework, but it's a way of assessing that we call it the path of leadership. So moving from a doer to a manager to a developer to a designer that's a systems thinker and a strategist, which is what everybody, if you're listening as a CEO or in the C-suite, that's a level you're at. So it's like, not only is it an assessment, it just helps you to look at what are the different behaviors and skills needed at each level.
To me, the idea behind this resource is that you don't have to figure it out. You don't. This is a resource created by a master in the leadership readiness, leadership development space. So it's free. I don't know why you wouldn't download this, which you can do at thelionsgroupconsulting.com/leader readiness. So I'll give that again. You can find this at thelionsgroupconsulting.com/leader readiness. Free resource created by the mastress. What is a I don't know, I'm going to make up words and just come along for the ride. The mastress herself, Patsy Feeman. Again, exceptional experience and wisdom and passion for creating leaders. Patsy, okay, we have one. Can you believe we only have one episode left in this series? Do you want to talk briefly about that? What are we going to cover? Why should somebody come back next time?
Because we're going to bring it all together next time with a very actionable approach of how to work on the business to create your roadmap for organizational maturity. So in other words, create your own roadmap for growing up your business so you can be ready to scale and grow your business. So we'll talk about processes and structures, and we'll probably weave many of the things or bring to fruition many of the things we've talked about in the first 4 episodes.
Yeah, and I know we'll talk about building a high performance organization in that episode as well. So thank you. As always, I learn just by being here, which is really not saying much. I'm not a very smart person, but I have the benefit of listening and just sucking all the wisdom out of your head. Thank you for that. You're awesome.
Pleasure.
Yeah, listener, thank you for sticking with us to the end of another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. You can find this episode's Let's Get Practical on our website. You can please engage with Patsy and I both, Patsy and me both, on LinkedIn. Connect with us there. And again, don't forget to download this free resource, the free resource that accompanies this episode at thelionsgroupconsulting.com/leader readiness. And we will see you next time as we wrap up this 5-part series on growing up your business.